Good evening, and welcome back to Required Reading. Today we'll be covering Chapter 4 of Ghostbusters the Return. Chapter 4. The second grader was sobbing and screaming, at least whenever she could catch her breath long enough to do it. She'd managed to stay ahead of the alligator until now, but wedged into a corner between the school building and the fence that surrounded the yard, there was nowhere left to run. The huge white predator closed in, opening its jaws. "Not so fast, Albert," called a voice from behind the beast. In a flash, the ghostly gator was wrapped up tight in the grip of an ion stream. At the other end of the beam, Venkman hoisted the howling monster up over the second grader's head. He maneuvered it over to the monkey bars, where Winston triggered the trap that swallowed it up in a burst of light. And they were everywhere! Off to one side of the schoolyard, the hysterical principal was babbling at high speed, a mile a minute. The children were in a panic. The staff, too. They train us to deal with fire drills, but nothing like this. Understandable, Egon replied. It was all we could to evacuate the students. We called animal control. And when did you start to suspect that this wasn't a natural phenomenon? Oh, when they started flying! Sure enough, 3 of the creatures were airborne. They flew in a fairly tight circle, buzzing a small plastic playhouse where a burly man in a uniform labeled Animal Control was hiding inside and whimpering. A short distance away, Ray snagged another alligator in an ion stream and guided it towards Winston's trap. "You know," he called to his comrades, "as fun as this is, we can't keep doing it one at a time. There's just too many of them." "Do you have a suggestion?" Venkman called back, steering another gator into the trap. "I've got an idea," Winston called back. A few minutes later, he was standing in the middle of the schoolyard, his neutrino wand sheathed and his hands empty. "Hey, you walking handbags!" Winston yelled. "You call yourselves predators? I've seen worse on 42nd Street. Come over here and I'll make shoes out of you." One by one, the alligators lifted their heads and turned in his direction. It wasn't clear whether they understood his words, or whether the blind creatures were simply responding to the sound of his voice. Either way, he was catching their attention. "Yeah, that's right," Winston continued. "I'll kick your tails right back to the bayou." He definitely had their attention now. The snarling predators were coming towards him, snapping their jaws. As they approached from all sides, they formed a moving circle around Winston, leaving him nowhere to go. "Oh, you're gonna eat me," Winston yelled. "I'll have you for breakfast. No wonder you taste like chicken." The circle was tightening around him like a noose. Winston could start to feel their breath on his body. Sweat poured down his brow and his voice started to get a little shaky. But still he continued. "You're as ugly as you are stupid, but hey, what can you expect from something that comes out of the sewer?" "Now!" cried Egon. Winston shielded his eyes as brilliant white light shot up all around him. Being blind, the alligators hadn't seen the ring of ecto-traps that lay on the ground all around him. But now that they were directly over the traps, they could certainly feel their effects. They roared in helpless rage as they were sucked in. Then, just as suddenly as they had opened, the lids of the trap slammed shut. The roars of the gators vanished, replaced by a series of small electronic beeps as the indicator light on each trap switched from green to red. "Nice one," said Egon. "Thanks," said Winston. "Yeah, but we're not done yet," said Ray. "We've still got to clean up any strays inside the school." "Can't we just let the cafeteria food kill them?" Venkman asked. Despite the tired protests, the 4 Ghostbusters cautiously approached the large metal doors of the school and entered the building. Inside, all was quiet. Their footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. They moved along in a loose circle with neutrino wands drawn, keeping all sides covered. As dangerous as the schoolyard had been, they knew this could be worse. The creatures could be lurking around any corner or behind any door, just waiting to attack. "Hey, I thought these things were supposed to be an urban legend," Winston said, an edge of nervousness in his voice. "Blind albino alligators in the sewers of New York? Yep, they don't really exist," Ray replied. Winston kicked open the door of the kindergarten room and leaned in to make sure it was clear. He found blocks, graham crackers, and finger-painted likenesses of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, but no alligators. Satisfied, he resumed his position with the group and continued speaking as they moved further down the hall. "Kids bring home baby alligators from vacation, but then get bored and flush them, so the alligators end up breeding in the dark of the sewers." "Uh-huh. Urban legend, all right," said Venkman. "Yes," said Egon. "But remember the stories about banshees vomiting blood through their eye sockets during homecoming dances? That was supposed to be an urban legend, too." "Until Berlin," said Ray. "Exactly," Egon said with a knowing look. Suddenly, Ray stopped. "Wait a minute," he said, pointing towards a nearby door. "The boys' room?" Venkman asked. "Ray, I thought I told you to think of that before we left home." "No," said Ray. "These things live in the sewer, remember? So where do you think they'd naturally gravitate?" "Worth a try," Winston said with a shrug. "Okay," said Venkman. "But if they're smoking in there, I'm telling their parents." Winston's military training made him the natural choice to take the point position. Once again, he kicked the door open and leaped into the room. He landed in a crouching position and swung his neutrino wand left and right to cover the area. The others followed close behind him. Their eyes scanned the bathroom, taking in the sinks, mirrors, and urinals. The room was as dingy as school bathrooms often are, with cracked tiles here and there and occasional bits of graffiti. But at first glance, the Ghostbusters did seem to be the only occupants. Egon shifted his neutrino wand to one hand so that he could pull out his PKE meter to measure the ambient psychokinetic energy in the room. "Poor Vinny," said Venkman. "What?" Ray asked, confused by the non sequitur. Venkman pointed at the message scrawled on a nearby wall. "Well, according to this, he's got a really tiny—" "Shh!" Egon said, putting a finger to his lips. He pointed at the gauge on his meter, which twitched badly, jumping repeatedly into the red. The activity intensified as he directed the device towards the 4 stalls at the far end of the room. All conversation ceased. The Ghostbusters crept quietly towards the stalls, hoping that they might still be able to take the creatures at least partially by surprise. Venkman caught the others' attention and pointed a finger towards the various stalls. Picking up on his signal, they fanned out so that each stood in front of the closed door of a stall. Venkman raised one finger, then 2, then 3. Acting as one, they kicked in the doors of their respective stalls. They flew open and slammed into the walls of the stalls with a resounding series of bangs, and inside they found precisely nothing. Oh, the usual things were there, toilets, toilet paper, and so on, but there was no sign of the spectral alligators. Venkman had to chuckle at the ridiculousness of 4 grown men armed with high-tech weaponry charging into toilet stalls. "Looks like your gadget could use a little cleaning, Egon. The only danger here is having to sit on these toilets." Egon studied his meter and gave it a shake. "I don't understand." Relieved, Venkman leaned over. "Hello?" he called into the toilet. "Anyone in there?" Without warning, the toilets exploded. 4 spectral alligators erupted out of the drains amid a shower of water and shards of porcelain. One of them flew straight through Venkman's chest. Reflexively, the startled Ghostbusters recoiled from the barrage, but they recovered quickly. As the ghost soared past them and out of the stalls, the quartet spun around with neutrino wands blazing. The mirrors over the sinks exploded into a cascade of broken glass under the force of the blaster's ionized bombardment. When the air cleared, the Ghostbusters could see that 2 of the beasts had been snagged in Winston and Ray's ion streams. The other 2 were airborne and circling the room, snarling and weaving in close to snap their jaws at their would-be captors. Egon wasted no time and immediately began throwing handfuls of paper towels on the floor. "Egon, I think they have janitors who can take care of the spill," Ray said. "I don't want to risk a short circuit," Egon replied. Satisfied that he'd used enough towels to see that the top layer remained dry, he dropped an ecto-trap on the top of the pile. The third alligator cried out in anger as Venkman wrapped it up in another ion stream. Egon triggered the trap, then took another shot at the final ghost. His first shot missed, taking out some ceiling tiles. The second one missed too, but the third time proved to be the charm. The gator was trapped. One by one, they eased the ghost into the trap, taking care not to cross their beams. It was more of a challenge in this confined space than it had been at Madison Square Garden. With a little effort, though, they soon managed it. The trap snapped closed, and the familiar indicator light flashed over to green. Egon used his PKE meter to sweep the area. "All clear." That gave the Ghostbusters the breathing room to slip their Neutroniwans back into their sheaths and assess their personal damage. "Everyone okay?" Ray called. Egon and Winston told him they were fine. They picked bits of toilet paper out of their uniforms and waved the wet parts of their jumpsuits back and forth in a vain attempt to dry them quickly. With a stab of concern, Ray realized that Venkman hadn't answered. He stepped quickly over to Venkman's stall. "Peter?" "Oh, I'm just dandy," Venkman said. He stepped out to reveal that his head and torso were covered in dripping, funky-smelling ectoplasmic slime, a souvenir of the alligator flying through his chest. He swept a hand across his face, then shook it to dislodge a large glob of slime. "But can someone please tell me why I'm always the one who gets slimed?" Lewis tapped his foot nervously. "For lunch, I was thinking maybe we could go to the macrobiotic restaurant on Green Street. See, from noon to 2, they have an all-you-can-eat brown rice bar for only $12.95 per person."
"That's fine, Lewis," Janine said. "But I told you, I can't leave the office unattended. I have to wait here until someone else comes back."
"Did you tell them we had lunch plans?"
"I'm sorry, Sugar Bear, but it's an emergency. It's at a school."
"Sure, I understand," he replied, checking his watch for the 4th time in about 5 minutes. "It's just that, based on my figures, if we each take 3 helpings at the buffet and it amounts to more than 3 cups of rice apiece, that would be a savings of 23% over the regular menu price."
You know, you can take your coat off and sit down if you want.
"Oh, no thanks. I'll just leave it on, in case they come back." Janine ran an emery board around the edges of her thumbnail, then blew off the shavings.
"Suit yourself."
Lewis kept tapping his foot. He hummed a bit, trying to appear nonchalant, but he couldn't contain himself. "Of course, if they're not back by 2 o'clock, then we'll miss the buffet, so in that case, we'll get a better deal if we go to Natalio's for their 10% off Tuesday special. I have it all worked out on a color-coded flowchart." Janine rose again from her chair and moved close to him.
"You're so organized. I just love that in a man."
"You do?"
Mm-hmm.
They leaned in towards each other, their lips drawing near.
Aww.
Squealed Slimer. A potato-shaped ghost floated nearby with a moon-faced expression and a mouth overflowing with uncooked pancake batter. At just that moment, the front doors opened, and the ectomobile pulled into the parking bay. Ray and Egon followed in its wake, deep in conversation, as was usually the case when they got into one of these kinds of discussions. Janine couldn't make heads or tails of what they were talking about. In fact, she'd long since decided that it wasn't even worth trying. "Took some ambient Carillion readings on our way back," Egon said. "Let me guess. Off the scale?" "Not even in the same zip code as the scale." Ray frowned. Was that phenomenon localized around the school?" "Mostly, but not as much as I'd like." "Sounds like there could be something big brewing." "I'd say. A lot bigger than a few spectral alligators." Lewis tugged excitedly on Janine's sleeve. "Great! They're back! Come on! If we hurry, they might still have some of the preservative-free whole grain dessert left at the buffet."
In a minute. I just have to give them their messages.
Janine started to walk towards the ectomobile, but she slowed and stopped about halfway there, trying to figure out what was going on. Winston had gotten out of the driver's seat and opened the back door. He was gingerly reaching down towards the person inside. "Easy, Peter. We're back. Let me help you. Careful. Try not to get any more on the seat." With Winston's help, Venkman stepped out of the car. He was moving stiffly, and it took a second for him to get his footing. The cause was fairly obvious, though. He was covered from head to toe in greenish, mucus-like slime. The dripping substance oozed down his body and was already starting to pool at his feet. "I'm showering here, you know," Venkman said. "I'm not having this stuff clog up my drain again. Last time it attacked the plumber and tried to mate with his snake." Janine took a good look at Venkman, then gave a dismissive wave. Slimed again. No biggie. She stepped crisply over to them.
"Hi, boys,"
she said. They mumbled greetings as they started to unpack the ectomobile. She flipped through a handful of small pieces of paper.
"You got a bunch of calls while you were out. Dr. Spangler, the Psychical Research Society called to remind you that they still haven't received your renewal yet, and they want to know if you're coming to the annual dinner and seance."
"I guess so. I'm supposed to give the keynote chant." Janine handed him the paper and went on to the next one.
"The mayor's office called. He's coming down here in an hour and a half to hold a press conference out front."
As one, they groaned. "He's coming here?" Egon said. "He never comes here." "Election year," said Ray. Winston opened the back of the ectomobile. He started pulling out piles of smoking traps and passed handfuls to Ray and Egon. "Not to mention, we just saved a school full of kids. Now that's a photo op." "Oh well. Anything for me?" Ray asked.
"No, but Dr. Venkman got 3 calls from a Mr. Gary Milken."
"Gary who?" "Probably a telemarketer," said Venkman. "I'm gonna go take a shower." "Okay," said Ray. "We'll stash the livestock in the containment unit." "Or the Walking Dead stock," said Egon. The 3 of them headed downstairs to transfer the trapped ghostly alligators into the high-tech storage unit in the basement. Venkman started to make his way laboriously upstairs. He was on the 2nd step when Lewis called after him. "Well, I guess I'll be taking Janine to lunch now. If we catch the traffic lights just right, we can still..." Venkman moved down a step and looked at him with a fixed, irritated stare. Slime dripped from his arm as he waved around at the otherwise empty room. "Don't you think someone should be here to man the phones and door?" "Oh, you're back now. Can't you do it?" Venkman glared at him. All was silent, apart from the gentle plip-plip of dripping slime. Lewis shifted nervously. I guess we could wait 5 minutes." "Thank you," said Venkman. Once again he started up the steps. But before he got beyond the third step, he heard a deep voice from the parking bay. "Excuse me, Dr. Venkman?" He looked down to see a group of well-dressed men in designer suits. He stared at them with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd been dipped in ectoplasmic slime and would really prefer to be standing in a hot shower. "Yes." The gray-haired man in front of the group stepped forward and extended a hand. "Gary Milken." Resignedly, Venkman walked back down the stairs. "Most persistent telemarketer I've ever seen. You must work on commission." "I'm sorry?" Venkman shook his hand, coating it in slime. "Never mind. Let me guess. The ghost of your great-grandmother won't get out of your rumpus room, the walls are dripping blood, and you keep hearing a voice that whispers, 'Get out of the house!' Well, Miss Melnitz here will be happy to assist you, and in the meantime, please, stay out of the house." He released Milken's hand and started back towards the stairs. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important date with a shower." Milken chuckled. "I'm afraid there's been something of a misunderstanding." He produced a handkerchief in his left hand and casually used it to wipe the slime off of his right, as though this sort of thing happened to him every day. He passed the wet, greasy handkerchief off to a young man behind him, who looked at it distastefully before sticking it gingerly in his pocket. "We're not here to hire the Ghostbusters. We're here because of you." "Oh," said Venkman. "Well, if you're here to deliver a subpoena, it's not really a good time right now." No, nothing like that. We represent the New York State Independent Party. Ordinarily, I would have waited for you to return my calls, but I understand you're scheduled to participate in a press conference with the mayor in a little while. I wanted to be sure to catch you before then." Despite the waiting shower, Venkman had to admit that he was starting to get curious. "Why's that?" "Dr. Venkman, do you know when the New York State Independent Party won its last mayoral election?" "Nope, can't say I do." 1926. We'd like to change that." "So you came all the way down here to ask me to vote for you. I don't want to criticize your campaign strategy, but at this speed you should finish off voters in Manhattan by the year 2620. Then, of course, there's Brooklyn." One of the well-dressed men behind Milken muttered to the equally grim man beside him. "Jumps to a lot of conclusions, doesn't he?" "Yes," muttered his neighbor, "but he's quick on his feet, and witty. Witty's good." Milken continued as though he hadn't noticed them. "We're here for much more than your vote, Dr. Venkman," he said with a winning smile. "To defeat Mayor Lipinski in this year's race, we'll need a special candidate, one with the commitment and charisma to lead this city out of its current hole and into a bright new future. We think you've got what it takes to do it. Dr. Venkman, how would you like to be the mayor of New York City?" Venkman stared at him, not quite understanding any of this, let alone believing it. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was speechless. "Me? Who better? You've devoted your life to helping others, while the current administration spends its time down in City Hall, kowtowing to the special interests. You're out there in the streets every day, keeping the public safe. But I'm not a politician. We see that as a plus. The voters are tired of politicians. They don't trust them." Venkman's brain was racing so fast that he was having trouble keeping up with it. It wasn't a question that he had ever expected to hear. All his life, his approach to the world had been an ongoing series of hustles, scams, and dodges, seeing just how much he could get away with instead of really working at anything. Even when he was 6 years old and subcontracting his paper route to the neighborhood kids, Venkman was always looking for an angle. In fact, that's what had drawn him towards parapsychology in the first place. It was all so nebulous that universities would give him a paycheck without him actually having to deliver anything of substance. And when they did finally catch on, and the cash cow went out to pasture, he convinced Ray and Egon to start up Ghostbusters. Of course, at the time, he never suspected that they'd actually wind up catching ghosts, or risking their lives doing it. But even with all the risks, it still beat working a real job. And now these people were asking him whether he wanted to take the reins of one of the largest and most prominent cities in the world. Whether he wanted to spend his days managing the million different tasks that made the city run. Whether he wanted to hold the final sign-off on the police, the civil services, and city contractors. It could be the greatest scam on earth. Forget about the nice house, he thought. Forget about the endless stream of free dinners and all the famous rich people coming to you begging for favors. Forget about never having to pay attention to parking laws or traffic lights. Just imagine what you could do with a gazillion-dollar city budget every year. Venkman left the stairs to greet the group with a broad smile. "Gentlemen," he said, "you've got yourselves a candidate." Milken ignored the slime as he grasped Venkman's hand warmly in both of his own. "Excellent," he said. "Welcome aboard. I foresee great things in our future." "Gary, you have no idea." Janine and Louis stared at each other in disbelief. "Mayor Venkman?" said Louis.
I wonder if there's still time to move to Jersey, said Janine.
The politicians in the room seemed much more enthusiastic. Unlike Milken, the rest of the team found it harder to forget about the slime. But despite some frowns and wincing, there were hearty handshakes all around. "Now, don't worry," Milken told him. "I recognize that your experience running a city government is, shall we say, limited. That's why we're going to pair you up with a deputy mayor who knows more about the ins and outs of the city than any man alive." He pulled over a small, balding man with wire-rimmed glasses and a comb-over. "Sid here served as auditor, city planner, and bondsman in 3 separate administrations. He'll be there by your side every step of the way." For the second time that day, Venkman was speechless. Auditor? A bondsman? Oh, the dozens of schemes that had flooded his mind in the past 10 seconds were evaporating just as quickly. But he recovered fast. There might still be a way out of this. Venkman threw a slimy arm around Milken and steered him away from the crowd. "You know, Gary," he said, "I'm sure Sid's great. He seems very talented. And that hairdo, well, what can I say? It's a chick magnet. But if you want to build a campaign as an alternative to the usual politicians and party line, maybe it would be better to go with somebody who has less experience." Milken's eyes narrowed with interest. "What would you suggest?" "Someone fresh, unsullied by the machinations of the political machine. Someone who could spend time focusing on this big, beautiful city instead of all the nitty-gritty little details. Someone who wouldn't get thrown by new ideas and just because they're not the way things have always been done." "Hey, what's going on?" Winston had a puzzled look as he came back up from the basement. "Someone," Venkman said, "like him." Milken studied Winston for a moment, considering the point. 2 Ghostbusters," he said, mulling it over. "But people don't vote for deputy mayor," said one of the well-dressed men behind him. "It's an appointed position." "True," said another, "but we play up the idea. With Peter Venkman, you don't just get one man, you get a team. 2 local heroes for the price of 1. "Interesting," said a third. The second man consulted a file folder. "He's got a nice background. Former Special Forces, Strategic Air Command training. There's a whole military heroes served his country angle." "He could bring in the minority vote," said a third. "Now, wait a minute," said Sid. "Huh?" said Winston. "It's unconventional," said Milken. "I'd say unconventional is what you were going for when you decided to recruit me," said Venkman. "True," said Milken. "I can't say that the conventional approaches have paid off very well for us in the past 80 years. He gave Venkman a confident nod and shook Winston's hand. "Mr. Zedmore, welcome to the team." "Huh?" said Winston. "Now, we'd better let you get to that shower," Milken told Venkman. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you. We'll be in touch." Venkman saw them off with a flurry of waves, handshakes, and friendly slaps on the back. "Huh?" said Winston. Janine and Louis just stood there, stunned by the whole spectacle. Ray and Egon walked in from the basement, carrying armfuls of now empty traps. "Did we miss anything?" asked Ray.